This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Okay, good evening everyone. Shalom Aleichem. We continue in the Orchos Chaim of the Rosh. We are up to Ois Nun Aleph. Says the Holy Rosh, you know that the Beis Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, had a Maggid that came to learn with him, that came to teach him, and in the Sefer Maggid Meisharim, the Beis Yosef says that the Maggid said about the Rosh, Asher Kadishi, Asher my Holy One. Says the Rosh Ois Nun Aleph, Al Tinashe Pigias Hamaves Shetavai Pisayim. Do not forget that the encounter of death, that it could come suddenly. Don't forget it. So the Rosh seems to be saying that aside from the obligation, now, question first. If you look back in Ois Lamed Beis, the Rosh said in Ois Lamed Beis, Zechar Yom Hamaves Tamid. Remember the day of death always. V'tseidel aderech hachein, and prepare provisions. V'sim beinei necha, and you should place between your eyes shnei eila tamid, these two principles always. So the Rosh already said in Ois Lamed Beis that one has to always remember the day of death. Why is he saying don't forget? So you say, because I already forgot Ois Lamed Beis. No, but the Rosh is not going to start repeating everything he said earlier just because we don't remember what it said earlier. So Rabbi Cheskel Sarna, in his Iyunim, quoted by Rav Goldberg, says that this is analogous to by Amalek, where there's a mitzvah to remember what Amalek did, and there's also a mitzvah not to forget. So too by the Yom Hamaves, there's like an asay and a lois asay. Ois Lamed Beis is the asay. You have to remember the day of death. Remember, a person always has to remember that they are destined to die. No one has ever figured out how to escape that. And number two, there's a mitzvah not to forget it. Don't divert your mind that death will happen and could occur suddenly. Which means that aside from the obligation to remember death and the obligation to prepare for it, there's another factor, and that is one always has to bear in mind that it could happen suddenly. And therefore a person always has to be ready for it. And don't think that there's ever a moment that a person is secure. Reb Chaim Kanievsky writes in his parish on the Orchos Chaim, citing the Medrash Rabbah, Ein shulta b'yom hamaves. When death calls, it's not like you could say, wait a second, it's almost 5 o'clock, I just want to catch the news on the hour. Nobody could ever, just wait, dinner's in the oven, give me like 20 minutes. No. When it comes time, there's no delaying. I just want to tell my family, no. Person has to remember that it could come suddenly. Like Rabbi Yoina in the Shar Beis, Ois Tesvav, he says his immortal words, Kol eis yikoin lekras aleikav, at all times one has to be prepared toward Hashem. Ki lo yeda ha'adam asita, a person doesn't know his hour. Al kein kil yosav yishtoinein, therefore his kidneys should churn. Uvitzdaka yikoinein, and with righteousness he should affirm himself. Lahashavrucha b'tahara, to return his spirit in purity. El ho'elokim asher nisana, to God that gave it. V'yichapes derachav u'ma'alalav b'chayam, he should investigate ways and paths every day. He should always search his actions. Yifkedem levakarim, visit them on occasions. V'leragam yivchanim. As Shlomo HaMelech says, B'chol eis yiu begadecha levanim v'shemen al roshcha al yachzar. At all times your clothing should be white, and you should not be missing oil on your head. The whiteness of one's garments is an analogy to the cleanliness of the nefesh, and oil represents masim tovim. So aside from the mitzvah always to remember, there's a command, one is enjoined to remember the day of death, but likewise one can never forget the occurrence, as well as the fact that it could happen suddenly. V'tizkar ma'amid hadin, and you need to remember the convocation. You need to remember the scene of the final judgment. It is clear from the Rosh that not only does a person always have to remember the day of death, not only does a person have to remember that one day they have to give an accounting for their actions, but one has to have the picture of the Yom Adin firmly implanted in their consciousness. One has to have that frightful scene of God standing there with the whole retinue of heavenly angels, and the person standing in front of the court, sort of hopeless, not helpless, and all the arrogance and all the facade that a person coats himself with in this world, it's gone, it just flies away, it dissipates. And a person has to answer serious questions. That cross-examination in front of the Attorney General, that scene, that maimud has to be firmly implanted in one's mind. Like the Mesilas Yesharim tells us, in Parak Chav Gimel, he says, as of Goldberg quotes, one has to imagine the moment of entrance before the great court, Shel Tzva Mala, of the heavenly retinue. At the time that a person sees himself before the King of all kings, HaKadosh v'Hatar, the holy and pure King, B'tachlis HaKedusha v'Tahara, the Almighty is the epitome of sanctity and purity. B'soid Kedoshim Misharsei Gevura, in the council of the angels, mighty warriors, Ashein Bahem Komum, they have no imperfection. And yet, V'hu Oimei Lefneim, and then a person has to imagine they are standing there. Garua, lowly, Pachos, Nivzeh, despicable, Mitzaratzmai. Man is inherently finite, full of bodily fluids. Tamei umegula mitzad masav, sullied on account of one's actions. Hayarim Rosh, can a person lift up their head at such an occasion? Hayiloi pischain peh, will there be any excuses, rationalizations? And they'll say, hey, where's your big mouth that you had when you were alive? You had to answer to everything. You could answer everyone. Aye goincha, where's your arrogance? Where's your honor? Where's your glory? Mayana, what do you think you're going to answer? Ma Yoshev, what will you respond? Says the Ramchal, Vadai shalu rega echad yitzayir adam b'sichlei ha'emes. Hazeh. If even for a moment a person would envision and picture this frightful scene, Tzir amiti v'chazak, an illustrative, graphic picture, Paroyach tifrach mimeno kol agava, all the arrogance would flee. V'loi tashavei oid, it would never return. So while we have a mitzvah to remember the day of death, and we are enjoined never to forget the ultimate fate of man, and that it can happen suddenly. But besides that, one has to have the image of standing before the Bezdin Shamala very clearly and graphically implanted in their mind. Rabbi Isai, that's something that should keep us on the straight and narrow. Have a great day, everyone. We'll see everyone tomorrow, 5:30. Bracha v'atzlacha.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.